Welcome back to the Den. It's Porter here, and today I will be talking about 6 wide receivers that I am completely out on for the 2025 fantasy football season. In this video, we'll go through the names, we'll break down why it is I'm avoiding them, where I have them ranked as opposed to consensus, and why you should avoid them as well. And what I want to help you do is really avoid this. So, if you look at that wide receiver chart, the wide receivers who go in round 25 to 48, there is not a great hit rate of these picks in fantasy football. And that's about the range where all of the guys in this video will be going. And I think if you're taking these players in the mid to late rounds of your draft, you're really hurting your chances at winning a championship. And this video is special because it applies to all formats, whether you're in a traditional redraft league. I think these guys are going way too high. And if you're in Dynasty, I think where they're valued right now is really their peak. And these are players that I am trying to sell at their current value. The first name on this list is Jameson Williams, the wide receiver for the Detroit Lions. Currently in your redraft leagues, he's going at wide receiver 27. And in sleeper startup, he's going about wide receiver 22. In my rankings, I have him as the wide receiver 36. And Jameson Williams is a great real life NFL player, a really exciting field stretcher, but he's being sold to you as a wide receiver 2 that you can start every week. Whereas with my ranking, I view him much more in that territory of a boom bust flex, if that fits the type of build that you're trying to have. Just last season, Jameson Williams finished as the wide receiver 26 in his points per game. And a lot of that was coming from special manufactured touches that were coming from the Ben Johnson offense. We know Ben Johnson left the Lions and he is now in Chicago, which is exciting for a different set of reasons. But I do think it's going to impact this Detroit Lions in a somewhat negative way. I think the Lions offense will still be very good. I'm not expecting them to completely regress, but Jameson Williams is really the one player where I feel like he was being the most elevated by Ben Johnson's scheme. A lot of his big plays that were coming on just like busted coverage and trick plays. He scored on multiple trick plays last season. And I think we're going to get less of that with Ben Johnson. So I do not feel comfortable at all drafting him as what I think will be my wide receiver 2 based on the range he's going in. But if you can get him later as more of a flex, I'm definitely fine with that pick. However, I'm certainly much lower on Jameson Williams than consensus this season. And there is some new target competition in town. And they traded 3 third-round picks to get Isaac Tesla, who now, after just 1 week of preseason, which we certainly can't judge too many opinions on, he looks the part. Like his athleticism really shine. So he might carve out a complementary role in this offense, and that certainly wouldn't take away from Amon-Ra St. Brown's targets. It's going to cut into Jameson Williams. So I am avoiding Jameson Williams in the middle rounds, and just where he's valued at wide receiver 22, I am happy to down tier him in Dynasty. The next wide receiver that I'm avoiding is Jeudy, who is going in really in the flex range in ESPN PPR leagues. He's the wide receiver 37, and he's really shot up in Dynasty after being a pretty dead asset. He's now going as the wide receiver 34 in startup drafts, but he came in much lower at my wide receiver 53. And I promise I'm not just trying to be a hater. This is all about cost and production, not about these players as, individuals or real life NFL contributors. But with Jeudy, his breakout last season came down the stretch where he, between weeks 11 and 18, so after their week 10 bye, he was the wide receiver 5. So he certainly flashed a pretty solid upside case. I think people are carrying that breakout into this season, but I'm not really buying into it. And here's why. So prior to the bye week in week 10, he was the wide receiver 50 in points per game, which is really where he's been for most of his career. He's always in like the late 40s territory as a fantasy player. And things were kind of fluky last season in Cleveland. They did not have a very good run game with Nick Chubb just not recovering well from the injury. We know that takes a year to really bounce back from. Jerome Ford's never really been an efficient running back, which this completely changed the team's identity. We know that Kevin Stefanski likes to run the football. In 2023, so just 2 seasons ago, they were in the bottom 5 in pass attempts. All they like to do is run the ball. However, this past season with Jameis Winston at the helm and no run game to speak of, the Cleveland Browns actually led the NFL in pass attempts. They were ahead of the Bengals, who we know just that's all they do as well. And the Browns were ahead of them. So I think this was a desperate offense that was looking for any sort of spark. And we know that Jameis Winston has that gunslinger mentality. And it really just led to increased volume for Jerry Jeudy down the stretch. And the way that I view this is, so Jerry Jeudy was number 1 in the NFL in his total route wins. So he was certainly winning routes and getting open, but against man, he was 41st in the league. So he really didn't show the ability that we're thinking he did. It's really just more about the actual volume where he was running so many routes due to this desperation. And Cedric Tillman, another receiver for the Browns, he was having a really nice breakout as well mid-season, and then he got hurt and missed time from weeks 13 to 18, which coincides with where Jerry Jeudy had his breakout. And I'm not trying to say that Cedric Tillman is this elite target hog, and that's why you should fade Jerry Jeudy, but he will get some of his. And this quarterback situation, as we know, is quite shaky this season. I think Stefanski's actions also show that they want to run the ball, where they spent draft capital on a second-round draft capital on Quinshon Judkins, and of course there's off the field things going on with him, but they double dip at the running back position and take Dylan Sampson as well in the 4th round. They're showing that they want to have more reliability and depth at the running back position so that they can get back to this high rushing offense with limited passing volume. So I think if you're taking Jerry Jeudy at this price of wide receiver 34 or wide receiver 37, you're really counting on him being an every week starter for you, and you're not going to be happy with that. There isn't going to be much touchdown upside in this offense. Either Vegas projects them to be the worst offense in the NFL in terms of points scored. So I don't see a ceiling here, and you don't have Jameis Winston either spamming Jerry Jeudy and just elevating the passing volume. I think we're going to see Jerry Jeudy regress more towards what he's been for most of his career. So I'm not buying this temporary year 5 breakout for Jerry Jeudy. Next player on my list is DJ Moore, a player who I think gets overdrafted pretty much every season. And we're doing it again this year. We're currently in ESPN PPR leagues. He is going as the wide receiver 21, and he's still valued quite highly in Dynasty at wide receiver 24. When I compiled my rankings, I had him much lower, or I dropped him towards my wide receiver 43. And I know that feels like a drastic dip, but here's why. So we know that Ben Johnson is coming to town, but I don't think that really makes the case that DJ Moore is suddenly going to become a superstar. Last season, he was the wide receiver 28 in points per game, which you might be thinking, oh, that's not like that much off of the ADP. So we should certainly be okay with that. But it's really the volatility that gets him there. So he had, as the wide receiver 28 overall, and if you're spending a top 24 receiver pick on him, you're expecting him to most weeks be in the top 24 and be your every week wide receiver 2. However, he only had 5 weeks last season where he was in the top 24 of wide receivers on the week. And a lot of those games, he was outside of the top 50. So he was barely usable. He just had a lot of spike weeks, and he played the full season, which elevates where he finished in Dynasty. And we are all expecting Rome Odunze to have a year 2 breakout in this offense, which certainly would hurt DJ Moore if that comes to fruition and Rome can live up to the player that he was drafted to be. But I think Ben Johnson's actions and words also both contribute quite negatively to DJ Moore's outlook. There were some passive aggressive comments made right when Ben Johnson came to town about the effort level of some of the veterans on the team. I think reading between the lines, a lot of that could have been targeted at DJ Moore, who even still through training camp, beat reporters are showing he's giving up on routes and just not doing much when he's not the target or the ball's in his hand. I don't think this is a good match for Ben Johnson, who wants to really maximize the effort levels out of all of his players. And I don't want to just look into those words and just assume the wrong thing about DJ Moore. That's not really fair to him. But the actions also speak quite loudly, where with the first 2 picks of Ben Johnson's regime in Chicago, they take a pass catching tight end in Colston Loveland at pick 10 overall. And then they double dip again on offense and get Luther Burden at pick 37, who we're now seeing, he just started practicing, but he's flashing to show that he has the ability to be a good NFL player. So I think Ben Johnson came to Chicago and said, DJ Moore and Rome Odunze, what I've seen of them is not enough on offense to build around, which is why he's going to pick those extra players. So at best, DJ Moore is kind of equally splitting this target share with 3 other very talented players. So I think we're going to see a really big dip in his production. He's been another player where so much of his value is tied to his target share as being one of the only options there. And I don't think that's the case anymore. And I think we could also see him leave Chicago. We really don't know how this coaching staff feels about him. And there's a very real possibility where Ben Johnson just wants to lean on the youth, and he views DJ Moore as expendable and wants to build the offense around these more exciting players. So I'm out for that reason, and I do expect Rome Odunze to really take the leap here as well. So I think DJ Moore's going to have a massive drop in his value. And if you're taking him as your wide receiver 2, I think you're making a big mistake. Next player that I'm avoiding is Xavier Worthy, who he's in a similar range to the other players we've talked about. He's going as a clear-cut wide receiver 2 in PPR ESPN leagues. He's going as the wide receiver 24. And in sleeper dynasty startups, his ADP is right around wide receiver 20. And when I compiled my rankings, I had him much lower, as is the trend for this video, at wide receiver 38. And if we think about Xavier Worthy, we need to keep in mind that, yes, he was just a rookie last year. However, Rashee Rice went down with the ACL in week 4 of last season. And Xavier Worthy didn't really run away with anything in terms of his fantasy production. And now we have a healthy Rashee Rice coming back, who I think the offense will funnel through. So Xavier Worthy is a great complementary NFL player and a fun field stretcher. He also has that type of boom bust profile where he will certainly have his spike weeks. But if you're depending on him being your wide receiver 2, I think he's going to have more low scoring performances than high scoring ones. You're going to be quite disappointed and you're going to be frustrated. You're going to bench him. And then that's the week he's going to explode for 150 yards and 2 touchdowns. So I can't justify the cost of where he's going for what I think I'm going to receive back in terms of production. So last season, he finished as the wide receiver 33 in his points per game. And again, that's with Rashee Rice missing the majority of the season. And even as Worthy being the only real wide receiver option there, of course, he was competing with Kelsey. Hollywood Brown missed time. They trade for DeAndre Hopkins. So Worthy really was the only stable piece of this pass catching core. Yet he was 55th in his target share at just 17.2%. So we know that that's going to take a major step back this year with a healthy Rashee Rice and even a healthy Hollywood Brown cutting into some of those targets. So if he couldn't turn the target share that he was able to have last year into a highly productive fantasy season for you, I don't see why we're banking on him taking a leap forward with a drastic change in opportunity within this offense. He did have some good red zone targets. He was 10th in the NFL with his 18 targets, and he had 11 catches in the red zone. So it's clear that they do want to get him the ball, or at least last season they did. They really liked getting him the ball in creative ways to score. But again, he was their best option in the offense. And I just don't think that's going to repeat here. And in those, he's being sold to you as this like wide receiver 2 in flex, but only 8 of his weeks last season were top 36 performances. So he's in the top 24 for ADP, but he was only giving you 8 top 36 performances last season as the best option on the offense. So I do think he'll take a leap forward in terms of talent as a year 2 player, but I think we're going to see massive regression in just his usage in this Chiefs offense, where I'm certainly avoiding him. Like we've said with some of these other players, those down weeks are going to hurt you more than the spike weeks are going to help you. And you're not going to be able to predict those spike weeks. And it's going to be quite frustrating for you as a fantasy owner watching Rashee Rice get all of these targets. And we do know that there's most likely a suspension coming for Rashee Rice. So in the long-term outlook, Xavier Worthy, if you do get him and he's having a strong start to the season, I would be trying to trade him and capitalizing on that early production, because once Rashee Rice is back, that production is going to dip. So I think we're kind of overreacting on the market with knowing that Rashee Rice will miss time, that's baked in somewhat to Xavier Worthy's ADP for this season, but you're going to be really disappointed the back half of the year when you really need him to win in the playoffs. And then it's just a 50-50 bet in your championship game if he's in your starting lineup. So I think we'll see a good leap from him in year 2 as a player, but I think we're going to see a pretty massive regression here for what he's doing for your fantasy team. And the next player on my list is Zay Flowers, another good, exciting young player who I think we're just really elevating here because he is the wide receiver 1 for the Ravens. So we know it's Lamar Jackson's wide receiver 1. It's a good team, a team that we expect to score a lot of points. So therefore, we're pretty heavily invested in Zay Flowers. So in your ESPN leagues, he's going as the wide receiver 30. In Dynasty, he's valued much higher as the wide receiver 22. And when I compiled my rankings, I had him all the way down at wide receiver 37, much more in that flex territory as opposed to this cornerstone asset that you can really build around in your leagues. So last season, he was wide receiver 36 in points per game with just 12.3 points per game in your PPR leagues. He was behind guys like Josh Downs, Rashid Shaheed, Darnell Mooney, Khalil Shakir. So you weren't very excited about what you were getting on the field from Zay Flowers. He did show that in his second NFL season, he did have some really high ceiling performances. He had 5 performances last year where he was ahead of 18 PPR points. But in the rest of the games, he had 11 games with less than 12 points. So he's also a fairly volatile asset where you're going to have his good weeks where things are clicking in the Ravens passing game. But more often than not, he's not going to be this, certainly not a centerpiece of what they're doing in the red zone. He's much more of the possession receiver between the numbers. And he is a very good route runner. He gets open. He has good separation. But I do think because of his usage and really his frame, we're not going to see elite touchdown or red zone usage from Zay Flowers. I mean, think last season, Lamar Jackson had the best passing season of his entire career, throwing for 41 passing touchdowns. And Zay Flowers only got 4 of those. So if Lamar at his absolute ceiling and peak is thriving without Zay Flowers being a wide receiver 2, I don't know how his price can continue to keep rising. So if he's still viewed as this very like every week wide receiver 2 that you're feeling good with in your leagues, please sell him down tier, get some picks. You may even be able to down tier him to players that are more productive than him. Like you could probably trade Zay Flowers for Josh Downs and picks. And Josh Downs averaged more than him just last year and is primed for a year 3 breakout of his own. So I'm not happy if I'm building around Zay Flowers. And I think that's a way to just really miss on these picks in the middle rounds. If you're spending, early wide receiver 3 picks on a guy who's going to not really be as flexible as you think that he may be. And to round out this list, this is the player that I am the lowest on, and it is George Pickens, who was my wide receiver 48, which is much different than his PPR ESPN ADP at wide receiver 28, as well as where he's going in sleeper leagues, also at wide receiver 28. So he's another guy that's viewed as more of a potential, like based on your build, a wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3. And I'm not really buying into that narrative. I mean, I feel good about him if he's my wide receiver 4. That's where I have him ranked. But other than that, I can't justify spending too much on him. And I know that he's been a pretty polarizing player for a lot of his career because he has some absolute ridiculous highlight plays. And we know he also has an electric personality on the field. And more than anything, I think the big winner of the Pickens addition to Dallas is Dak Prescott. So I do think from the real NFL standpoint, George Pickens is a great addition to the Dallas Cowboys and certainly the type of player that they need opposite CeeDee Lamb that can go get some contested catches and give them big plays and just add another layer of explosiveness to the offense. However, my main take here is I just don't think the volume is really ever going to be there for George Pickens that he needs to succeed. I mean, last season, CeeDee Lamb had over 150 targets. I don't think that's really going to change. And the wide receiver who was second in targets had around 80. So I think that's kind of more of what we're looking at with Pickens. But we also have to consider that last year, Jake Ferguson also missed a lot of time and they just signed him to a very large extension. So he's going to eat into some of these targets as well. So between CeeDee Lamb and what we've got from the other receivers, how much actually is there on the bone for George Pickens to have? And whatever he does get in Dallas, I think will be less than what he was able to acquire in terms of volume last season in Pittsburgh. I know it's a much different offense and quarterback play was very different, but him and Russell Wilson were actually connecting quite a bit on some deep balls, which is what we know George Pickens' strength is. So he's also going as this wide receiver 3, but he only had 6 games in the top 36 last season, despite having a 26.5% target share, which was 14th in the league. So he's not going to have that same volume playing with a player like CeeDee Lamb. So I think George Pickens was elevated even just last year by the volume he had as the only option really for the Steelers. So now that's going to take a massive dip. And when he had high volume, he wasn't able to do much with it. And I'm of the mindset, I think Dak Prescott's a good NFL quarterback. I think Dak Prescott's a massive upgrade for George Pickens. So there certainly will be a bump in efficiency. But if George Pickens couldn't deliver in fantasy with no competition, I don't see why now all of a sudden, just because he's changing teams and is going to have less volume, that he's now all of a sudden much more in this wide receiver 2 range. I'm really just not buying that at all. And I know that we have seen Dak produce seasons with Lamb and Amari Cooper on the field, delivering really strong fantasy performances. And maybe that's where some of this is coming from, that we think this offense is going to revert more to that type of offense. But I think things are just a little bit different here. I still think, CeeDee Lamb is who he is. He's going to command that volume. And I think we'll see George Pickens and Jake Ferguson really compete for being the number 2 leader on the team with targets. So I like George Pickens as an addition to Dallas. I think it elevates Dak's value more than anything. But I think if you're really leaning on him just because of this new landing spot to be an every week starter for you, you're going to end up quite disappointed. And one thing that we can't really ignore is that Mike Tomlin has such a good track record of getting rid of wide receivers. We've seen it with Antonio Brown, Deontay Johnson, and Chase Claypool, that if he's giving up on Pickens this early, really just to replace him with DK Metcalf, I'm not sure that I can feel confident. I don't think I know more than Mike Tomlin does. So I just don't think we're going to be happy with George Pickens. And if he doesn't deliver right away in this first season in Dallas, his value is going to just continue to tank, and he could very easily enter dead asset territory based on what he's shown with all the volume on his side. And then now, if he disappoints here, people are going to really be out on George Pickens. So let me know what you think of my rankings. Reminder, this is all about fantasy production. So if your favorite player is on here, it is not a personal indictment of this player or their ability. These are just players that I do not think are going to contribute to fantasy football teams the way they are being drafted in 2025. I'd love to hear your busts. Leave a comment below. Who are you completely out on for this year? Who are you trying to sell? And as always, I'm always open to a friendly debate. So I'd love to talk in the comments. Thanks for checking out the Den. We have a lot more coming on the way, so make sure you hit the subscribe button and like this video. I will see you in the next one.